Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a solo episode, and I have a topic I want to dive into, and that's how many sets you should do to build muscle, and then 9 things that can impact where you fall within that range. But before I do that, I just want to go over a few ways you can help support the podcast. So first, if you'd found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast and help more people get this information. So if you think people would benefit from this, please leave that rating and review there with that. And again, I appreciate everybody who listens. Next, I have my free masterclass on body recomp, what it is, how to do it. The link to that is in the show notes as well. And then I also have my free masterclass on nutrition periodization. I go over each nutrition phase, how to set it up, common mistakes, adjustments. Everything you need to know about each nutrition phase is in that nutrition periodization masterclass. And the link to that is in the show notes as well. And lastly, if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, and that's where I'm most active on social media. And if you have any questions on anything, you can reach out to me there. If there's something that maybe didn't make sense on the podcast, you can always shoot me a message over on there and we can get that. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's topic. So how many sets to build muscle, and then 9 variables that can impact it. I think this is good because there's a lot of questions around volume, right? How much do you need to do? What's a good amount? And I think we can find a nice little range to be in, but where you fall within that range really comes down to the time commitment, right? That's going to be a big one that people don't think about, is the time commitment. How long can you commit to it? And many other factors as well too. That's actually one that, as I'm sitting here talking about it, I just realized that I want to add that in, as obviously time constraints. Maybe I do have time constraints in there. Yeah, so that's actually one, right? That's one that we need to consider here. So before I actually get into these, people wonder how many sets they should do or how much they should do. But really, we first need to go back and be like, okay, what can you realistically commit to this? Because if you're somebody that you have a ton of other things going on, it's okay, maybe this many sets is what you would be optimal and whatnot, but then it really comes down to, can you actually do that? Because if you can't, it doesn't matter, right? So again, what you can actually commit to is super high on the priority list, right? This is the same thing with loss and like body composition and stuff like that. People, they want to know how much fat they can lose, how lean they can get. And really one of the big factors there is going to be like, how much do you want to put into this, right? That's going to play a big role in this. If you don't really want to track your food, you don't want to get your steps in, you don't want to focus on sleep, we have to be or you just want to continue to enjoy your weekends, not have to stress about it. There's going to be some trade-off there, right? So same thing here with the volume. Something I just wanted to go over real quick. It came to mind here. Didn't plan on saying any of that, but you just get my thoughts here on this podcast, right? So let's dive into the sets. So how many sets? So I would say 8 to 20 sets per muscle group per week is going to work for most. And honestly, you could probably even fall underneath this. I would say even 6 sets per muscle group per week is going to be, depending on what you do and everything that I'm going to go over, I think we could even lower this to closer to 6 sets. I think if you go under this, for most people, you're probably going to be more so maintaining than anything, but I think you could go as low as 6 sets, potentially even lower on certain muscle groups, depending on your genetics and things like that. But I would say 6 to 20 is going to be the best. And then, like I said, maybe if we want to be even more optimal, maybe closer to 8 to 20. But like I said, in some people, closer to 6. So let's just frame that as 6 to 20 sets per week. That's a big range, though. We're talking pretty significant amount. So it's like, where can I actually fall within that range? So before you think too deeply on this, though, in terms of where exactly you fall on it, it's very important that you have these 3 things. So first, you need to push yourself regularly, aka you need to train within 0 to 3 RAR and apply progressive overload. We say 8 to 20 sets, but if you go in and you just lollygag and you're not really pushing yourself when you go in and you're just checking the boxes, it's like, then this kind of how much volume you do is less important. Like, you need to get that nailed down first before you worry about how many sets you need to do, because we could say 15 sets would be the most optimal. But again, if you're staying 3+ reps away from failure or more, and you're not really pushing yourself, that's going to obviously change. You'd be better off focusing on that first, and you could probably find those numbers be a little bit lower. That is one thing that I will say, and this is a spoiler alert here, is the further away you are from failure, the more volume you probably are going to have to do, generally speaking, there with that. If you continually improve your technique and execution, again, like, that's going to be super important. It's how many sets should I do? If you're doing it with terrible technique and execution, it's kind of lollygagging, you're not really pushing yourself, your technique is terrible. Again, that's going to change these numbers, and these numbers are less important than at that point. So again, making sure that you are always striving to have good technique, improve your technique, and improve your execution. That's something that we want to continually be doing, and that's going to be higher on the priority list than like how many sets you actually do. And then 3, stay consistent. You wouldn't believe how many times it's how many sets should I do? But then you look and it's 1 week they're training, the next week they're not. 1 week you're doing 2. Again, these numbers are less important. You just need to get consistent first before you stress about about how many sets to do, right? So you need to have those three things in. I think that for 99.9% of people, doing these things and being within the 6 to 20 set range per week for each muscle group, this is going to be more than enough to build muscle. And I think you really don't need to get too caught up in these numbers if you're doing those things. But if you're not doing those three things, it's again, these, that you need to focus on those first, right? Again, these numbers become less important. Like I said, you could overthink, like, should I be doing 17 or 13 sets? And if you're not pushing yourself regularly, you're not really focused on your technique and execution, and you're not staying consistent, it doesn't matter, right? But in saying that, on the flip side, if you're choosing between, should I do 13 or 7, and you're doing those three things, it's like you're probably going to be seeing good results no matter what, because you're doing those three things, whether you're doing 13 or 17 sets. It's not like if you do 13, you're not going to see any results because you're not doing 17, even though you're doing these three things. So again, we want to keep that in mind there with that. All right, so let's go over the things that are going to impact maybe where you fall within this range. Okay, so first, our genetics. Some people just need more than this and some people need less, right? So where you fall on either end of the spectrum are really going to be up to your genetics, right? Some people can recover from higher volumes. Other people can't recover as well. When they start to get to higher training volumes, they start to get some tendonitis, some wear and tear on their joints, stuff like that. Whereas other people, they can go higher volume and their body just handles it well. And yes, there's things that we can do from a intensity, technique, recovery side of things, nutrition that can help recover from more. But just generally speaking, if you had somebody that did the same thing, they had the same inputs, but different genetics, there's potentially is one person that's going to be able to just recover from more, all things equal there with that. So again, start in this range and then do the things mentioned initially, those three things I talked about, and then make adjustments based on your results. If you're finding that 20 sets is too hard for you to recover from, your sleep's not great, stress is super high, nutrition's poor, technique's not there. So again, let's focus on those things first, and that should help you be able to do a little bit more or to handle this stuff. But again, we need to just get some data and then make adjustments from there. And so this goes into your genetics, but the specific muscle group you're training is also going to be impacted by how many sets you can do, right? So it's not if you can do 15 sets on quads that across the board, you should do 15 sets on all muscle groups, right? Some muscle groups are going to be able to handle more volume than others. And then some muscle groups may need less. Again, this is going to come down to genetics. This is going to come down to your body type, how you're structured, how your bodily structure is. These are all going to be things that are going to impact that. How certain muscle bellies are. These are all things that can impact how much volume you can do for each muscle group. So not only is there going to be a genetic variation from person to person, but within each person, there's going to be a genetic variation and a variation in terms of how many sets you can do per muscle group. So again, it's how do I know? What I would generally do, and this is going to be my kind of takeaway, is start on the low end and then slowly increase over time based on your recovery and how important that muscle group is to you. So for example, for me, I can get away with a lot less in my quads and leg training than I can with my upper body training, right? So if I just did across the board 15 sets, I probably have under-recovered, overdeveloped legs and underdeveloped upper body compared to my lower body, right? So again, these are things that you'll start to notice over time. Now, what you probably shouldn't do is if you just started training a year ago and it's, I don't really want to train legs, so then I'm just going to ramp up volume a ton on, like, I do think you should start relatively even with everything. Again, maybe you started the 8 sets that I talked about, and then you slowly work your way up, and then you adjust your volume for each muscle group based on preference and results. The next thing that's going to impact how many sets you can do is your intensity of training. So the more intense you train, so the closer to failure you are. And again, understanding that generally speaking, we want to be about 0 to 3 reps away from failure most of the time when training. But again, the closer you get to failure, be able to do overall. So this has brought up the debate of, do you need to train to failure? Should you keep a couple reps in the tank? We have some research showing that leaving 1 to 2 reps in the tank is just as good as training to failure for muscle growth. However, that 1 to 2 RIR is going to come with less fatigue, right? So again, it just begs a question, yes, maybe in one set going to absolute failure is going to be the absolute best for muscle growth, but that's going to come with a little bit of a higher fatigue cost. But there is some research to show that even staying 1 to 2 reps away from failure is almost just as good as training to failure, but with less fatigue costs. So I think what that means is, again, you should, maybe push it to failure for certain muscle groups at certain periods of time, but that probably shouldn't be your default, like every single time you train, every set there with that. And then again, the less intense you train, so the further you are from failure, the more volume you'll be able to do there with that, right? So again, if you're staying 3, 4, or 5 plus reps away from failure, you're probably going to have to do more volume to make up for that, okay? And again, this is generally speaking here with that. So again, the closer to failure you get, the less volume you're going to be able to do, right? And this is going to come from just more fatigue, obviously getting closer to failure. So you're not going to be able to recover from as much. But again, we go back to the genetic side of things, and somebody may be able to train pretty close to failure and get more volume than someone who trains a little further away from failure, right? And again, this just comes down to your body and how you recover and everything like that. Another thing that's going to impact how many sets you do is other training, other exercise you do. So the less training you do outside of hypertrophy work, the more volume you'll be able to do, right? So the less you do outside, right? So if you're doing like other types of weight training, you're obviously going to you're going to have to do lower volume overall, right? If you have some sport that you play or practice, or you have practice specifically for that sport, again, you're probably going to be able to do a little less hypertrophy work, a little less volume compared to somebody who is only doing hypertrophy work. Same thing with like cardio, right? The more cardio you do overall, the less volume you'll probably be able to handle from a muscle building standpoint, right? From your hypertrophy work. Again, this is also going to be dependent on what muscles you're using in the other forms of exercise, right? So again, if you're doing a lot of running, generally speaking, you're probably going to have to do less volume for your legs, right? So again, that's going to factor into this. What I will say on this is I used to be on the thought of, oh, so you shouldn't do anything outside of hypertrophy training so you could do more volume. But I do think that is going to come at a cost. I think if you're not active at all, like you're very sedentary or you just have really poor like cardiovascular health, aka you don't do any cardio whatsoever, I do think that's going to impact you slightly, right? There's that sweet spot where doing no cardio, no weight, no like physical activity is probably going to hurt how much volume you can do, how much you can recover from. And then there's going to be this kind of sweet spot where like the more you do, the more you're going to be able to recover. Like it's going to increase your recovery. But then we get to this tipping point where if you keep doing more, now you're going to go on the other end of that valley there, right? Now you're going to come down on the other end to where doing more is going to impair like how much you can do. So there's going to be that sweet spot. What is that? It's really going to depend on the person. Just for me, again, this is just me. We can't say that this is how it would work for everybody. I find zone two sessions for about 45 to 60 minutes per week. And then I play hockey once a week, which is 45 minutes of intermittent, higher intensity type kind of cardio work. Has been a sweet spot. And to me, that hasn't impacted how much hypertrophy training I could do. Right now, if I start doing 3 to 4 sessions, I add in another one, is that going to start to impair it? Who knows, right? So again, this is going to be trial and error with all this, right? Your training age. So how long you've trained will influence how much volume you can do. I do think that as you get more advanced, you're probably able to handle more training volume, but at the same time, you're getting better at execution. You're increasing the weight, you're increasing the intensity most likely, right? And so that's probably you're going to end up doing less. But I would say, obviously, someone that's been doing this for a while is going to have a little bit more room to do more because their body's just used to that versus somebody who just has never lifted weights before. So again, this is where I think starting on the lower end of this is definitely a good starting point. Exercise selection. So this is one that people really don't realize either, right? It's like, how many sets should I do? Again, all these things are going to go into it, but also the exercises that you choose. You can probably do more volume of isolation type work over compound exercises. So again, to say, hey, you could do 15 sets of quads. Again, we got to dive into that more. Is it 15 sets of leg extension? Because if so, you probably could do a lot more than 15 sets per week of just leg extension, right? But is it heavy back squats? All right, well, now that's probably going to drop that number down, right? You're probably not going to be able to do 15 to 20 sets of heavy back squats all week, right? So again, exercise selection is going to play a huge role in here. And again, generally speaking, I would say more isolation type exercises are going to lend themselves to you being able to do a little bit more volume compared to more compound exercises. The next one's going to be rest times in between sets. If you rest enough in between sets, you can get in generally speaking, you can get in more high quality volume, which can decrease how many sets you need to do, right? So if you're taking really short rest times, if you're going into your next set, like under recovered, still fatigued, it's going to be hard for you to get fairly close to failure, right? So then what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to do more volume to make up for that. So again, if you rest a little bit longer, you'll be able to have more high quality sets, which is going to allow you to be able to do less overall, right? So it's that catch of doing more volume in less time, or doing less volume and spending, maybe you would do more work overall, or rest a little bit longer and do more high quality work. Again, I think having a good blend of this is important, but it's still good to know that the longer you rest, the more high quality work you're going to be able to get in. And so you're going to be able to do less sets generally, right? But again, if you take short rest times, you may have to do more sets than someone who rests long enough in between sets. Just keep that in mind. That's something that's going to factor into that. And again, I do find benefit of having some incomplete rest sets, but then also making sure that most of the time you're well rested going into your next set there with that. And again, this isn't like a straight number because it is going to depend on the exercise selection. Same thing, if you're doing dumbbell lateral raises, are you going to need to rest 3 minutes like you would in between a set of back squats? It's going to depend on the exercise selection there with that. Next is going to be your recovery outside of the gym. So the better your recovery is, the more intense and the more volume you'll be able to do. Your sleep and stress management play a big role here. And so does your nutrition. Again, the better you can recover outside, like your body's going to be able to handle more training volume, right? You're going to recover from that. So again, what I mentioned initially, but your recovery is going to be key. So this is again, where it's like, how many sets should I do? It's what's your recovery look like? Are you actually if you're sleeping 3 hours a night and your stress is super high, you have really poor nutrition, you're probably going to do less than somebody who is very recovered. Your cardiovascular health, the better your aerobic base is, the more volume you'll be able to handle and recover from. Basically, don't skip out on your cardio. So that goes back to what I said earlier, where it's like how much volume you do outside of your muscle building training for other exercise is important. But again, there's that point to where we do need to get some cardio in because that's going to help us recover from more there. And like I said, it would be hard to say the exact number there on that, but again, that's something we'd want to look at. But again, this kind of goes back to the recovery, how your stress is. Like if you have a lot of other life stressors going on, I would be pretty sure that you're going to be doing less volume than somebody who has less stressors overall, right? So this comes back to if we're going off of what professional bodybuilders are doing, you have to understand that their full-time job is to build muscle, stay lean, right, and get even leaner during their contest prep. That's what they do. Whereas most people have a job, other things going, not to say bodybuilders only, just like they have a life as well too. Most of them do. I'm sure some just do that. But again, the things that you have going on outside any life stressors, right? This can be stress, but it can also just be if you have a high workload, like that's going to impact your mental capacity and how much you're going to be able to do overall. I guess too, one thing that would impact it, that if you work a very active job, that's something that's going to impact how much volume you can do and recover from. If you're super active, you have to lift heavy stuff, you do some sort of like construction or whatever it may be, like manual labor job, that's going to impact how much training volume you could do, right? Versus someone who sits at a desk all day. It's like you don't have as much like physical load going on. Now you may have more mental stress, which is going to impact how much you can do, but you don't have that physical side of things. All right, so let's get some final takeaways here. If you are seeing results on the lower end of the set range, you can either stay there and continue to milk out gains, or you can slowly increase to see if a little more volume will improve results. So I do think you should start on the low end here and work your way up, because if you can see results here on this lower end, that's good. Now, if you're not seeing results on the low end, then maybe you do start to ramp it up a little bit with that. I do think it's beneficial to take a week every once in a while to decrease volume, aka take a deload week. You're not always pushing your volume up. You're not always doing the max amount of volume that you can do. You do take some periods of time to how much you're doing overall. If you do decide to add sets, make small increases, right? So no more than 10 to 20%. So what you wouldn't want to do is, okay, Jeff said 8 to 20 sets. I'm milked out all my gains at 8 sets. I'm going to go straight to 20. No, you should not do that. You should make small increments over time. There may be something to having periods of time where you go higher volume, potentially over the 20 sets on, say, 1 to 3 muscle groups, and then keep everything else closer to maintenance. Then you cycle back through other muscle groups if you want. So again, you could do that where you're probably not going to be able to max out volume on every single muscle group, but maybe you have 1 to 2 that you really try to ramp up the volume, see how your results are. This could be a lagging muscle group, a muscle group you want to continue to bring up, or you just want to test it out to see how much you can do. That's something you'd want to do. But again, you wouldn't want to just have everything be at the max sets there with that. So my kind of view on volume is, I do think that the goal should be I don't want to say the goal should be I think it would be a good idea. Like, I think in a perfect world, doing as much volume as you can with as much high quality work as possible is the place you'd want to be. But again, where is that for each person? Because, for example, they had this 52 set study that came out recently. I think it was from NS et al. And they found that in the quads, they had a group go up all the way up to 52 sets. And they did find that muscle growth was not impacted, basically saying that you could theoretically go up to 52 sets. Now, in saying that, I don't recommend anybody do that because I don't think most people can recover from that. Also understand that in that study, they had everybody else, or they had every other muscle group. Not every muscle group was up that high. But I do think what this can show is that we don't know what the max amount of volume you can do yet is. And I do think that the more volume you can do, again, this needs to be high quality volume though, the better off you're going to be. So again, what is that kind of sweet spot there of intensity, quality, and how much volume you can do, right? So again, finding that Goldilocks zone of quantity and quality is obviously what we're going to try to shoot for here. So in saying that, I do think that all things considered, if you can, you should try to get in as much volume as you can that you can recover from. The problem is that number is probably a lot lower than what people think, especially once they do the things I talk about: stay consistent, actually train 0 to 3 RIR, and continue to work on execution and technique. I think most people will find that number's a lot lower than they think, and they don't need to go up to 20 sets or 30 sets. Very rarely do I have clients actually get up to 20 sets on any one muscle group. Same for myself as well too, right? Because really we're focused on that quality, because most people just look for the quantity and they overlook the quality. But again, I do think from a muscle building standpoint, if the more high quality volume we can do, it's probably going to help you with building muscle to that point there. But again, it's probably a lot lower than you think with that. So that's it for this episode. Let me know if you guys have any questions on this, if there was something that didn't make sense. This was a fun one, so I hope you guys enjoy it. That's it for this, and I will talk to you next time.